It hadn't even been hard to see the dealer. Ambush had seen him conducting his illicit business in the middle of the day. Not his preferred time to patrol. His particular set of powers worked much better at night when they couldn't be broken by strong light. But he'd had a day off and not been able to sit still. How could he relax when there were criminals out there? Criminals like the dealer. He had spotted the man in the corner of a parking complex. The dealer himself was in his 30s. His customers couldn't have been more than 20. Ambush wasn't the sort of idealist who believed that the dealer was corrupting the young. The two youths had either sought his product out or they'd been willing to try it when offered. But the dealer was definitely harming them by providing them with drugs, with mind-altering poison. The pair of younger men had committed the crime of being stupid. The dealer did something a lot more insidious. The anger Ambush felt was cold, not mindless rage. It was the kind of feeling that came from needing to hurt someone, to make the evil they were committing stop. The warmth would come later, the afterglow of a good deed done well. Ambush ditched his civilian clothes for his costume in his car, watching the transaction come to a close over the top of the groceries in the back of his station wagon. He'd have to be quick. He didn't want anything getting too warm, but he didn't expect that to be a problem. He slipped quietly out of the back seat of his car like a specter and, like such an entity might, sunk into the shadows on the ground. He rose up out of the ground behind the dealer a moment later. He needed an unbroken shadow to move through, but there was plenty of that on the bottom floor of the car park. "Isn't your location a little cliché?" The man half jumped out of his skin as he wheeled around, only to find his legs getting swept out from under him and his backside hitting cement. Ambush wasn't really the quippy sort, but the sudden voice from behind, the implication that the dealer had been caught, the shock and fear was the beginning of the repercussions for his target's chosen trade. The dealer tried to scramble away, but Ambush kicked him hard in the ribs before he got very far. The criminal shouted out in pain, only to have the vocalization catch in his throat when Ambush's foot collided with his side again several more times, cracking bone. "Too late for that," Ambush growled. "If you didn't want to get hurt, you shouldn't have hurt the community." "The fuck are you on about?" the injured dealer yelped. In the way of an answer, Ambush knelt down and reached into his victim's pockets. He felt the other man shaking for the brief moments he searched him. Good. The likes of him deserved it. A moment later, Ambush was drawing himself back up to his full height and dropping a bag tightly packed with something green on top of his quivering quarry. "This is for fucking weed?" the dealer groaned. "You're a poison on the populace," Ambush said matter-of-factly. "It's just weed," the dealer whimpered, as if that was going to change Ambush's mind. In response, Ambush stomped on the dealer's knee, eliciting an unpleasant crunching sound. That earned a lot less of a shout and more of an ear-splitting scream. "It's legal in a lot of places now! Fuck!" "It's not legal here," Ambush said, "and hopefully those other places come back to their senses again soon, too." "I'm just trying to feed and clothe my kids, man. What is wrong with you? You fuckers really think you're heroes doing shit like this?" the dealer shouted past grit teeth. Ambush ignored the questions. He didn't need to pay any mind to the criticisms of the filth of the earth. Instead, he pulled out a set of handcuffs from a pouch and dragged the thrashing dealer into the nearby stairwell. He locked one cuff around the dealer's arm and another around the railing on the rickety stairs. "You can take your complaints up with the police when they arrive," Ambush said. "I'm sure they'd love to hear them." Truth be told, Ambush couldn't guarantee that the other man would actually be imprisoned for his crimes. Things always got tricky with the courts when it came to heroes that operated outside the reach of law enforcement agencies like himself. It didn't matter. The dealer had been punished already, and if he had any sense, he wouldn't risk incurring Ambush's wrath a second time. The community would be doing better regardless.
Hello and welcome to Stories Across Borders. Here we discuss stories told across a range of different mediums. Books, comics, games, you name it. The only rule is that we can only talk about things in terms of the writing. Anything like acting, mechanics, or art is out unless it relates directly to how the story is being told. I'm Daniel Radford, author, defendant, and also your host. And today I'm joined once more by John Kernan to discuss my short story, Paragon? And yes, it really does have the question mark.
You can hear it.
And rightly so. As you just heard, Paragon is a story about a guy who is arguably a superhero. He's puts on the costume, uses his edgy shadow teleport powers to go and keep his community safe.
He really cares about keeping his community safe from anything that might harm it, like weed.
Horrible, horrible stuff. No, it's kind of the point. I wanted to really lead into almost a satire, I guess. Like, it wasn't supposed to be funny necessarily, but it is very much a satirical take on the idea of a superhero. Not so much I guess you could call it a deconstruction.
Satire also works. Satire doesn't have to be like explicitly to make people laugh so much as making fun of the thing.
And deconstruction might actually be better because it's not so much making fun of the idea of superheroes, but more pointing out that if you transferred superheroism to our reality, J. Jonah Jameson might be right.
Oh yeah. Like, if the Marvel, honestly, if the Marvel world just was more interconnected from property to property outside of crossover stuff, but like I think Jameson would barely be yelling about Spider-Man at all. He'd probably be like an anti-mutant campaigner that the X-Men would have to worry about. He'd be cropping up all of the little people with special powers and abilities that are like popping up all over the place and starting to do their own thing, but maybe not doing it as well as others, or just not having the time to do it quietly that people like Peter did.
Yeah, I mean, because the thing with superheroes, right, is that nothing explicitly gives them the authority to do what they do. They really are just vigilantes when you think about it. And that means
Yep.
the only thing that is guiding their decisions, for the most part, some of them obviously they end up with some oversight or in teams or whatever, but just going generally by the concept. The only thing guiding them and their actions is their own sense of right and wrong and their own morality.
And
So,
everybody sits in a different place on that spectrum.
exactly. On one side of it, you've got your Supermans and your Captain Americas, and on the other side of it, you've got the Punisher. And our boy Ambush honestly leans closer to the Punisher side of things.
You know what you know what I like about this actually? It doesn't just feel like he leans a little closer to the Punisher. It feels like he's trying to be Captain America and being closer to the Punisher instead.
Oh, for sure. 'Cause in his mind, he is the Paragon. That's why it has the title it does.
He's just so in for good that he can't stand up for any bad, no matter how small, and he's heard about the Reefer.
That sounds like a 70s villain name.
I can't help but imagine him having sat in front of the TV listening to a ton of those commercials from the 70s.
And the episode would be like, have like a shitty pun for the title. It'll be like called Don't Fear the Reaper or something.
Yeah, exactly. Don't fear the Reefer. That's perfect. That's exactly what I was thinking of.
But yeah,
God.
That's the whole thing. Like, he thinks he's the Boy Scout hero.
Meanwhile, if Captain America was actually next to him, he would be like, "Dude, it's pot. Relax. My grandma smokes it for her glaucoma." No, actually, no. I guess with Captain America, the joke would be, "I need that for my glaucoma sometimes."
It's just, and that's the thing, is like, this is not set in the 70s or the 60s or whatever. This is a modern setting where this guy is still like, no, it's evil. It's like, it's illegal just about everywhere.
You're in one of like three places in the country where it isn't.
Or just in Australia in general.
But still illegal in all of Australia?
Yeah.
Dang. I thought Australia would love pot.
We have a political party here called the Hemp Party, which is Help End Marijuana Prohibition. It's just best acronym.
That is a really good acronym.
Yeah, but he's like, well, the law says, because in his mind, the law and morality and ethics are the same thing. They're not, one doesn't inform the other necessarily. It's just unethical if it's against the law, which is also blatant hypocrisy.
This guy over here read that Batman comic where he curses and threatens people with guns and was like, yeah, this is Batman.
I mean, what Batman does is a crime too. He's going out and he's beating the shit out of people because he has decided they are criminals. He's just lucky that he's also the world's greatest detective and isn't wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
But he's still violating the law by taking it into his own hands.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, not just that. Like, Batman sits in such an interesting place because he is easily the most vigilante of all the big famous superheroes, and yet he's also the one who works the most closely and consistently with the police.
Yeah.
I can't think of any other famous superheroes who are close friends with their local police chief.
No. I bet Ambush would love to be.
Oh god, Ambush would be so excited. I bet he has dreams about being given the key to the city.
Oh, honestly, probably. But yeah, he's like, "Oh, you're doing it. You're dealing in a little bit of weed. I'm going to shatter your kneecap and crack all your ribs."
There, deal to the kids now, scum.
Yeah, like, and he's like, that's his thought process. Even though, like, is okay. Well, the cops might not be able to make this stick because of my actions, but this guy's gonna have PTSD, so we won't do it again.
Yeah. Meanwhile, even though it's not one of the things he says out loud, I can almost see the dealer in his head being like, "This was just for a little bit of extra money today. I have to go to work tomorrow."
I mean, that's the thing. Like, Ambush doesn't question motives. He just
Nope.
sees a crime being done and decides it's his duty to do a bigger crime in response. And the only thing that lets him do this, really, with the confidence that he has, is the fact that he has power. Because ultimately, that is what separates a superhero from an everyday person. It's that they have the power to act on what they think is right or wrong.
Yeah. When it comes to superheroes, the hero part is subjective. The super is not.
Exactly. Could not have put it better myself. And that's the reality of it, is that sometimes you're gonna get the Punisher. And realistically speaking, if we're dealing with people who want to, put on spandex and go out there and beat people up using their superpowers, chances are you're more likely to get a Punisher than a Superman.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's literally people out there in the real world already, even frighteningly cops who legitimately already use the Punisher as their symbol and seek to be like him.
Exactly. Overzealous police are very much a thing. And then, even then, there is like a degree of oversight and limitation to what they can do. There is theoretically consequences.
Not enough, but they're there.
Yeah, God, no, not enough. Certainly not in some places. But you look at someone like not Paragon, like Ambush. It's fine, I just wrote the story.
That'd be a fun name for a superhero that's a Superman ripoff. Just straight up call him Paragon, and his whole thing is just that he's the Paragon.
I very nearly did it. I almost felt like he wasn't enough of like a Boy Scout superhero ripoff parody, whatever, to do it. But you look at him, and what prison is going to hold him?
Apparently, only one that can afford and guarantee that it is going to be 100% lit up 24/7, and that isn't somehow going to cripple the non-superhero people who have to work there.
Yeah, it would be theoretically possible, but so easy to make one slip up. So you've got this borderline uncontainable guy who has decided that because he has power, it is his job to use that power. It's his great responsibility to deal with the evils of the world. Unfortunately, his idea of the evils of the world isn't, I don't know, billionaire CEOs whose companies are paying minimum wage, if that, to people working in intolerable conditions for insane amounts of time, scraping together barely enough food to eat while, say, I don't know, go to space or tank Twitter.
Yeah. And although it'd be really easy at first to think it's a good thing that that Ambush is at the moment at least really small scale for stuff like this, that also means he has no oversight. He is not beholden to the court of public opinion or anything like that right now. He is as vigilante as it gets. Literally, the only thing that sets him apart from some rando beating people up he thinks are bad with a baseball bat is that his baseball bat is a superpower.
As far as the story entails, he's not even super strong or anything like
Nope.
that. He's just got the teleportation thing with the edgy flair.
Nothing personnel, kid.
Oh god. And that's just that is the main thing I wanted to illustrate, right? Is that the minute you apply some real world logic to superheroism, it falls apart. Because one, their sense of morality isn't necessarily the Superman type of morality. It could be, you are a criminal, therefore you deserve to die. Or at the very least, be assaulted and maybe never even walk the same again. Two, it's kind of just a crime in itself. And three, it's just an exercise of power, isn't it? The only reason that these people are capable of doing what they do in whatever stories they're in is because they have power that most people do not. You know, even the non-superpowered heroes like Batman and Iron Man, I mean, they are clearly, for their universe, still in peak physical human condition. And also,
They were
they
born
are
with a
geniuses
superpower.
among geniuses among geniuses. They are incredibly brilliant, and they have the resources to put that brilliance towards doing things. And intellect and political sway and most importantly, money are still power.
I mean, yeah. money in a lot of places and a lot of times can do more than superpowers.
Honestly. And that's kind of what Paragon is putting forward. It's just the comment that when you take these people and just move them into our reality, what you have isn't our reality gets better. What you have is a problem.
I wonder if there is a Batman story where Bruce Wayne tries to start influencing the world more with his money to make it a better place, only to start falling into a lot of the same pitfalls actual awful corrupt CEOs do once he owns too many things and he's too much about business and not enough about Batman.
I don't know. I feel like it's definitely been touched on that he could be using all that money to do things like fund education and...
Well, he does.
He does.
He's probably the most philanthropic of the rich superheroes.
For sure. But, it's definitely been talked about that he could be using the money that he's putting into being Batman to things that would have long-term, consistent benefits going forward into the future.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, God, I'm sure they got government funding or something, but think about how expensive just setting up the basics of the Justice League must have been. How much money goes into that tower, that computer setup, getting all those people together. Thinking about the actual economic impact of it is staggering, which I think must be why they don't talk about it.
I mean, they don't talk about a lot of things in superhero comics or just superhero stories in general for the most part, because it is supposed to be this heightened reality where just about anything is possible. It's the reason that Paragon feels uncomfortable to read is because it doesn't have that heightened everything's a little bit more to it. It's very much written like a guy has just decided to beat the shit out of this other dude for selling some weed.
I mean, literally, for all we know, this exact story could be happening somewhere right now. We don't even know if anybody out there has superpowers yet. We don't have any reason to believe they do, but for all we know, that guy who's out there beating up a dealer could just actually be Ambush. Nobody would know.
Who would believe them?
Exactly.
Someone would be like, you've been in your own supply, I see.
Be like, yeah, no, that's what happened. I got so high on weed, I shattered my own kneecap in the parking lot.
Really wanted some broken ribs today, that's all. yeah, I can see it's funny, like, you can see who Paragon is in his daily life, even
Oh yeah,
without knowing anything at all about the life he lives outside of being ambushed, other than he shops at that one place, clearly.
yeah.
He's obviously not super wealthy, he drives a fucking station wagon. But,
I bet he goes to the same grocery store every day. He chats up the cashiers. Every once in a while, he calls somebody citizen and ignores the raised eyebrows.
he's definitely one of those people who's like, oh, kids don't want to work anymore, all these immigrants are taking all that, like, he votes right wing, you can tell.
Oh yeah.
And
No, he's slightly on the extremist end of right wing. He's not all the way there, but
yeah, that's the thing.
pretty
Like,
far.
people start developing superpowers, some of them are gonna be Republicans.
There, honestly, it's this like political bits aside. Although definitely a bunch of these people would be fitting into specific parties or at least places on the political spectrum. It's just the scariest thing about superheroes, and we know plenty of other stories have already touched on this, but like, there's always more to say about it. Is who tells the people with superpowers what they can and can't do? Who has the moral high ground? Heck, forget that. Who enforces the moral high ground? Is it just the people with superpowers? Well, that's great. They're already stronger than the rest of us.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing with Ambush. I think one of the things that makes it uncomfortable to read Paragon is what isn't explicitly said, because he never says anything, I never say anything that says this is where he draws the line.
Yeah. We don't know if he would do worse or already has.
Yeah, today he's going after a drug dealer. It's weed, it's probably better than alcohol, but okay, that guy is committing a crime. He is theoretically giving bad things to people who should not have it. In theory.
What did he do the last time he was at that grocery store I mentioned earlier and he saw somebody homeless walk out with some food they didn't pay for?
Exactly.
Did he do something about that?
And
Because, oh no.
he might have. Or, hell, maybe he is just a little too into the Bible and thinks that certain things that get talked about as being sins should definitely be punished.
Oh no.
Fuck, maybe he's racist.
He could be, for all we know.
I mean, exactly the point, isn't it? It's the things that don't go said that make him even more concerning. It's this idea of, hey, superheroes are people, right? Well, yes, they are.
That
So
means
they've got their own experiences, beliefs, and biases. Correct.
and all those biases and experiences and beliefs could be directly affecting how a superpower is used. That's great.
Right? Because that's the thing, like, if you're reading or watching, Daredevil or the Punisher, like, just going after these, like, street level criminals and just absolutely beating the living shit out of them, or straight up murdering them, it's like, yeah, you understand how they've come to the point they're at. But, wow. I mean, when you read and watch that, because of the heightened super reality they exist in, you're like, yeah, fuck yeah, get them. And then the minute you think about that in terms of actual reality, it's like, Matt, Jesus Christ, you were a lawyer. You know this is not okay.
Oh yeah, no, Daredevil is one of my favorite examples where it comes to that stuff because he's a fucking lawyer. He knows literally every single thing about the legality and lack thereof of the things he's doing, and he is directly contrasting his day job, arguably contrasting his day job more than somebody like a cop or something would be.
Yeah, it's like, okay, so that guy you just took out, held up a store. The gun wasn't loaded, but you didn't know that. And
No, it's okay. He did. He heard it.
Yeah. And let's check your response to that. Oh, he's in the ICU. He may never walk again. He can't see out of one of his eyes. And if he survives the night, his life is irrevocably changed. Oh, by the way, the reason he was robbing that place is because he's been laid off, can't get a new job, and his family is starving. But you're the hero.
Yeah, no, that's actually why I think it was a great decision back then that their like season 2 of the Daredevil show was Daredevil meets the Punisher, because that we get that more or less. Like he has to deal with that fact of like, oh man, I already wondered if I was going too far. Look at this guy over here. He's a psycho.
I mean, like, the Punisher is my favorite example of a hero who reads a hell of a lot more like an anti-villain to me.
Oh yeah, and honestly, like in a lot of iterations, he kind of is. Like, the Punisher isn't just the superhero, the quote-unquote superhero with guns who shoots people and is totally ruthless. He's the quote-unquote hero that other heroes like look down upon and sneer and sometimes wonder if they should just stop him themselves.
Yeah, I mean, like, people love to hold the Punisher up as like the ideal of the anti-hero, but
he's not even
disagree.
Like shown off as that in his own story.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to think that.
Yeah, it's led to a whole like slew of edgy anti-heroes basically. But the reality of it is, he's a villain. An anti-villain maybe, his end goal might be to make the world better. But that end goal does not justify the straight up horrors he is inflicting upon the world. Okay, the Kingpin is legitimately evil. The people working under him, probably evil. Some of them, just poor, because that's how crime actually works at that level. Is that a lot of the people are just desperate for the money and are willing to do some like low-level thuggery to survive. And then the Punisher comes in and he shoots them in the head. That's not a hero. Like, they should definitely be held accountable for their actions. But the price for burglary should not be death.
Spider-Man makes things better where he does his heroing. The Punisher does not. Things aren't just better after the Punisher leaves and after he's done. At least not a lot of people's lives, like, improve in the aftermath of his heroing.
And I mean, the reality of the situation is he's largely doing it for his own satisfaction because of what he lost.
It's one giant revenge quest. He's getting his revenge on the very concept of crime.
Exactly. And let's be real, I mean, even, goody two-shoes Peter Parker makes mistakes.
Yeah, and he's the one who's trying the hardest not to.
And it's not always the Venom suit. Sometimes he just fucks up. And you're gonna have that, and that's what is so funny when you think about like how we're like, yay, superheroes, everything is great. They're still people, and therefore will make mistakes. And sometimes stories do address that. The whole Marvel Civil War arc stems because it starts with a big mistake in the comics, and also in the movies, actually.
Yeah.
When I wrote this story, I wasn't writing it as a criticism. I wasn't saying, you guys don't think about these things, because they do. It's just not always important to the kind of stories they're trying to tell.
And also, ultimately, it doesn't get applied consistently enough or always to the right characters to really have a big, proper impact, because Civil War is a good example of like, well, by the time it actually happens, there's kind of too many heroes and they're too big. So it becomes such a big thing that it's a bigger problem than what it was trying to fix. It's not called Civil War for nothing. Like,
yeah, it's
Iron Man creates like a small army of anti-Spider-Man like teams to go after Spider-Man, and then Peter Parker decides he's right, gives up, and reveals his identity just to be targeted personally and have the exact shit that was the reason he always kept his identity secret happen in the middle of all this chaos.
Yeah, exactly. I am not... Paragon isn't a criticism of Marvel or DC or anyone else, but they're saying, like, hey, you don't acknowledge this, or whatever. Because the reality is sometimes they do, and sometimes they make some very compelling stories. Some of the biggest crises heroes have is when there is collateral damage that they didn't anticipate, or they make a mistake, and the wrong people get hurt. Paragon is more directed at you guys, at the audience, and just saying, hey, have you ever thought about this?
Sometimes you got to think about it for a minute. You know, there's a reason The Boys exists.
Yeah, I was almost reluctant to do this story because satires and parodies and like deconstructions and all that of the superhero genre have become so much more prevalent.
But that doesn't, delegitimize it.
Yeah, I mean, I was just saying that I very nearly wrote a story that was just a Paragon doing Paragon things because I was like, well, that will be unexpected for me, but I didn't feel it, so you got this instead.
Yeah, it's okay. You just do the same thing, but you add a question mark to the title, and then you add a question mark to the content.
Kind of, yeah. And the original idea I had for this story was actually going to be from the perspective of the dealer. And I didn't end up doing that because I wanted to get more in the head of the hero and like illustrate the idea of, hey, this is just a guy and his own biases and hypocrisies are on full display. Whilst if it had been the dealer, it probably would have been more about, hey, the fact that heroes exist in general is kind of fucked. I'm just selling weed. So
yeah, we're seeing Ambush have the same thoughts just a regular person on the street might have, except he inherently at all times has the power to act on them and the desire to.
Exactly, and that's why I ultimately did choose to do the story from Ambush's perspective. It was because I wasn't trying to write a criticism of superhero society in the sense of from that perspective. I wanted it to be more a showing of these are just people and they are able to act on these things because they have power. And the question is that okay?
Yeah, and I think it also works better this way anyways, because this way we have a little bit more ambiguity, because we don't know what kind of person the dealer is. We just know what he's doing isn't a big deal. Like, he might still kind of be a shitty person outside of this, but also he is not currently doing anything that warrants having his kneecap shattered.
Or alternatively, he could just be a pretty normal dude outside of this, whose interests are those that the law has not necessarily caught up to yet. And here's a question. Suddenly, weed gets legalized wherever this story is happening.
Ambush moves.
Does he move to somewhere where this is still illegal? Or does he continue pursuing the exact same people even though now it is no longer a crime?
Does he start a political campaign because he's tired of sitting by and watching as the rule of law goes down the toilet?
Well, yeah, because that would be ridiculous, but a viable and acceptable thing for him to do. It's an interesting question though when you think about it though, because it's like, if he stays, it actually almost makes him a better person in my eyes.
I can see that.
Because if he stays and keeps doing his vigilante thing in that community, it shows that he does still care about that community. He is horribly misguided and misinformed because clearly he doesn't understand certain things. He's doing bad things, but his heart's in the right place. But if he were to say, well, it's legal now, so I guess either it's okay now or I've lost, and fuck off somewhere else where it's no longer legal to go after people doing weed there. says to me he's not in this because of any moral feeling, any moral obligation he believes he has. He's doing it because he doesn't like these people and he has an excuse to hurt them.
True. Very true.
And I don't
Yeah,
know
no,
which
it's like
is more
where does he
dangerous.
actually stand?
Yeah, where does he stand? Does he think I personally think he thinks he is the hero. But
I believe so.
but he's acting in a context right now where his belief system is supported by the law. I honestly don't know what would happen if that would change.
Yeah. He clearly takes the law very seriously, so how would he feel if the law
Does he?
suddenly changed? I mean,
we've already established he's a massive hypocrite. He's committing like 4 crimes in response to this one.
no, it's not crime if you're doing it to a criminal. Come on. The law only applies to people who are already following it to the letter. You know, like ambush. Hmm. Hmm.
I'm beginning to see a problem.
How about that?
I mean, how many people, right, are doing heinous, horrible, fucked up things in reality on a much larger scale that honestly believe they are heroes, that they are saving people, that they're making the world a better place, that they practically have messiah complexes.
Oh, they're out there.
There's so many.
Yeah, it's funny, right? Everybody who does anything that they think is good or is good gets them gratitude or whatever, regardless of how shallow your motivations are or aren't. At the end of the day, no matter how selfless anybody is, it's impossible to deny that the reason you do a good thing is you get a good feeling out of it. Because if you didn't, you probably wouldn't really have any confidence that it was a good thing you were doing. So, like, you think you do good, it feels good. And so even people who start out doing a good thing, or maybe technically are doing something that is good, can really easily fall into selfish motivations and not really just be doing it simply because it's what their morals demand. Because they are getting satisfaction out of what they're doing. And the same thing applies almost exactly the same way to people who maybe aren't really doing something all that good, but think it's good.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. And I think that's actually one of the things that separates a good hero, a good superhero, from a bad one, is that if you don't question what you are doing, there is no way you can be trusted to be making good judgment calls. Now, I would argue that even the ones who are definitely doing good arguably still warrant some criticism because they are still acting outside of the law, outside of society's collective ethics and morals. They are still beholden only to themselves, and they're only able to take this action because they have the power to do so, and nothing can stop them. But at the very least, if you are in that position and you've made that kind of conceited choice and decided that because you have that power, you can and will act and will use that power to make the world better, if you are at the very least question if what you are doing is the right thing, I think you become infinitely more trustworthy that you are in fact doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And that's the danger of paragons, actual paragons even, is that they have a supreme belief that they are doing the right thing. And that makes them dangerous, because even if they are not, they will still believe it.
Yeah. Paragons don't question themselves very often. It's, we don't call Paragon type characters Boy Scouts for nothing, because it also comes with the negative connotations of when you jokingly call somebody a Boy Scout. They're just going to do what is supposedly the right thing, and they're not a lot of times they don't question their own actions or whether they should do something any more than the corrupt, selfish people who just don't care.
And that's, once again, why this story is Paragon with a question mark. Because Ambush has that same confidence. He believes he has an obligation to use this power for the betterment of society, whatever that means, and he is damn well gonna do it, even if he is acting on bad information, or biases, or just his own personal issues. And all of those things are still true of proper actual paragons, like Superman and Batman, Captain America. The only thing that is different about them is they are largely actually morally and ethically correct about who their targets are and what their goals are. They are more focused on saving people than on harming people who are doing wrong or capturing villains. Whilst Ambush, I mean, he called himself Ambush. He's clearly not focused on protecting people. He's focused on taking down villains.
Yeah, like he's not Cat's Cradle or something that like makes the darkness or the shadow sound like nurturing or protective. He's Ambush, and that is what he does. We watch it happen, and it's brutal.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like, I wanted this to be a very short story. I wanted it to be a snapshot. You know, I didn't want to give a lot of backstory to either Ambush or the dealer. I didn't want to set up a lot of clear world building about where powers have come from and all that, because ultimately all that matters is that snapshot. I wanted it to be a brief look into the lives of these two people when they intersect for that one moment, and how that goes horribly for one of them, and one of them thinks that's okay. In fact, one of them is responsible.
He doesn't just think it's okay, he thinks he's doing great.
Yeah, I wanted it to be like a splash of cold water, you know, just to separate yourself from the heightened super reality for a minute and think about what this means for actual reality, what the reality of this situation would actually be.
Sometimes it's not very nice.
Because I do think that there are some underlying dangerous messages in traditional superhero stories. Like, again, this wasn't meant to be a criticism or anything like that. I like superhero stories. But I prefer the ones where the hero legitimately has to, often even questions what they are doing. And the ones where there is something holding them accountable. Because there is something a little off about the message that if you have power to affect change, you absolutely should act on that power. Because on the one hand, shit yeah, if you have the power to make the world better, you definitely have a responsibility to use that power to make the world better.
Yeah, but
you shouldn't be the sole arbiter of what better is.
Also, when those actions are beating people up, you know, there may not be a really huge list, but there are a lot of things in the world you can do that like are objectively making the world better. What if somebody had a superpower that let them purify water? I mean, we talked about Invincible already, but like Adam Eve is a great example of somebody who, if her power is used responsibly, but not even in the kind of responsibly that you need most superheroes to use their powers. Hers just need to be used literally, like fiscally and physically responsibly, and they can objectively make the world a much better place. Whereas you always have to question whether it's the right thing to do to beat the shit out of somebody or not.
Absolutely, and you definitely should always go, is this acceptable? Is this person currently doing real harm to others? And
am I actually helping anybody if I throw this punch?
Exactly, that's the big difference, I think. Like, I know we said it a little bit already anyway, but it's the question of, is anything going to be better because I'm doing this? And Ambush certainly thinks that the answer to that question is yes. I don't.
But we can see a lot of easy reasons that it might not be, or really in this case, probably isn't. This guy is not he's stealing weed.
Yeah, which I think, I mean, I am not an expert, I'm going to make that very clear, but as far as I'm aware, safer for you than alcohol, which is legal, or tobacco, which is legal.
And he's not even giving it to kids.
Yeah, and, the people he's dealing to are young, but they're not, like, school age. And you can question, well, did he check their IDs? Does he know? You don't know, but neither does Ambush.
Ambush doesn't wait to find out.
Yeah, and he's not asking questions.
He's not called wait and see, he's called ambush.
Yeah, with some slight tweaks, this would be a horror story. If I had written this from the perspective of the dealer, this would be a horror story.
Yeah.
He's just going about his day doing something maybe a little dodgy, and suddenly this entity springs out from the shadows, beats the living shit out of him, and disappears back into the darkness.
Yeah, his attacker literally steps out of the shadows and beats his ass and then is gone again.
Yeah, that's not a hero from his perspective. It's a slasher victim villain.
Yeah, like the only thing he has to be thankful for right now is that he wasn't literally murdered.
Honestly, yeah. From his perspective, this is like Michael Myers. This isn't fucking Superman or Captain America or anything else. Any other, like, individual you'd see and feel safe and relieved. This guy is like, I've just got mugged. And they didn't even take anything.
Honestly, Ambush would, like, if they ever had a smaller scale story in the universe, Ambush would fit in great to the universe of the boys, because, like, I won't get into all that since we're not doing an episode on the boys, obviously, but, like, although it's much more cynical and sometimes gritty than Invincible, the boys is also just like, hey, what if we try to apply the, like, real world logic to superheroes? How messy do things get? They get this messy.
See, that's one of the reasons I mean, you all know at this point, between the previous episode and my long history of saying it, but Worm is really good, and that's one of the reasons I like Worm, is that it takes the idea of a superhero reality and goes, okay, now what if we apply some logic to it? What would this actually be like as a world? What would it be like to live in? What changes would have to be made? It injects that reality. It does so in a bit of a different way, but it still brings up these ethical questions of, is it okay for these people to use their power like they do? And I guess maybe that's influenced how I see superheroes a little bit. All this other media that I've really enjoyed that is like raises these questions. But these are thoughts that I have had for a long time.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's like one of the reasons that Spider-Man is so popular is the mantra of with great power comes great responsibility, and that's because more so than a lot of other catchphrases or mantras or whatever related to other superheroes, it applies equally in like every facet of life and is open-ended enough to be understood in so many different ways. Like one of the Peter becomes Spider-Man because, right, he has the responsibility to do something with his power. But that's not the same. With great power comes great responsibility, because sometimes the responsible thing to do is not use your power.
So true. It's why it's such an iconic line. It's why it's so good. And
it applies just as much to every single person in real life as it does to a superhero.
For sure. Like, damn right. Yeah, if you have power, you absolutely have a responsibility to use it to do good things. But by the same token, you also have the responsibility to exercise restraint when your use of power might actually harm the world. And that's the part that Ambush missed out on. He's like, okay, I've got superpowers. I have a responsibility to fight crime. He has never once realized that he also has a responsibility to make sure he is acting on correct information, that he is held accountable for his actions, and that he shows restraint when it is necessary.
Yeah. He really missed that memo.
Unfortunately, he did not miss the deal.
Nope. Nope. His fist flew true.
But yeah, I think, given these previous episodes, I know I said it already, but I'll say it again. Given the episodes in this cycle, what we've chosen to talk about, I think it could be very easy to go, wow, you really don't like traditional superhero media, huh? And that's not true. Like, I genuinely really do like superhero stories.
I wouldn't think about it so much or question it if I didn't like it.
Exactly. That's why that's one of the things that makes it interesting to me to deconstruct it and apply these different lenses to it, because it is just cool. And yeah, I think stories like Paragon are kind of becoming the norm for superhero stories now. I'm not gonna lie. At the very least, a lot of the more prevalent stuff is now dealing with a lot of the ethical side of things like that. We have seen kind of the downfall of true Paragon heroes to the point where it is now more subversive to do a true Paragon than it is to do someone like Ambush. But at the end of the day, that's going to swing back around eventually as well, because people are always going to try and do something subversive. So now that true Paragons are becoming less common, eventually they will become the interesting subversive thing to do, and we'll get people start doing that, and suddenly they'll blow up and they'll be the big thing again. Stories are cyclical like that.
I'm ready for it. I want to see more stories where we take a Paragon to the logical extreme, for better and for worse.
Yeah. For me, for this particular story, it really was just I wanted to explore what happens if you take the concept of superheroes and put them in actual down to earth, our reality, and question, hey, who is deciding the moral and ethical boundaries they follow? It's themselves. So naturally, a lot of these heroes are gonna think they're paragons when in reality they're punishers.
Yeah.
And it paints a very scary reality, and it does so in a way that I think is different from the likes of Invincible or The Boys or something like that.
Absolutely.
I like to think so anyway. It's
much more ground level for one thing.
Yeah, it's not like this big, huge, overarching corruption in the way that is dealt with in The Boys. It's not. It is almost more in line with Invincible, almost. But even then, it's not. It's not this big question of who are you as a superhero or whatever like that. This idea of what happens when Earth's protector turns into a tyrant. It's not injustice or Invincible or anything like that. It's just the question of, these are people. What is keeping them from the wrong idea? But you've heard enough about enough of me blathering about what is ultimately a very short story. So we can wrap this there.
As with many of our other topics, we could probably go on for hours more, but
we shouldn't.
We got our limits.
So, as always, you can find this podcast on my website, radfordwrites.com. If you are not currently listening to it there, chances are you are. If you are listening to it on my site, you can also find it on Spotify, and I don't know what's happening with Google anymore. They're moving away from Google Podcasts and axing that to start focusing on moving all that stuff to Google Music, I think, which I'm probably not going to do, so we'll see what happens there. You can also find me on Twitter at DanielWright7 or pretending I'm on Blue Sky at Radford Writes. And also, if you are checking out my site, remember that the story will be up there at some point, and I write articles and stuff there as well. John also does things. He streams on Twitch at
you can find
Saphir,
me at you can find me at Saphir, and Hopefully, by the time you watch this, I will have more streams back up because I am healthy once again.
Which we do appreciate. And of course, you'll see plenty more of him here on this podcast. Until then, goodbye.
Bye.